Hello, beautiful souls, the Army of Light Earth Division, the boots on the ground. It's Shauna L. Francis. Today is just turned 12 a.m., July 26, 2023. Thank you so very much for joining me for today's weekly briefing. And today I'm going to tell you what Melchizedek has told me about how the pyramids were built, who built the pyramids, and why they were built. We're talking about the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt here. It's something that I've been asking about for a very long time, and I guess they decided I'm finally ready. Sorry for these nails. You know, you sit down at the nail tech and you talk about ideas, and these things come to life. I haven't had my nails done since I think last summer. I'm going to a family reunion. Yeah, people they're like, yeah, that's Shauna. Anyway, so that's distracting even for me. So finally, it's just been a wonderful week. Honestly, just feeling so good. I finally got the newsletter out. Please sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already. Um, let's see here. I spent a lot of time in the halls of Amenti. They asked me early on this last week to spend 60 to 90 minutes per day in the halls, basically cycling energy and just some beautiful healing work. And a couple of upgrades. But I really don't want to focus too much on that today. I want to get into this whole pyramid business. And guys, it's not in alignment with a lot of some of it may be kind of ancient aliens, this kind of situation. But for the most part, there's a lot that's not in alignment with anything I've ever read. And I'm by no means any kind of an expert here. But I can just tell you what I was told here by Melchizedek over 2 different days this week. And I'm I'm excited to hear your feedback. I don't listen to a lot of other channelers because I really want to keep my channel clear and I don't want to be inadvertently influenced by what other people are saying. So please let me know if you're hearing or have heard anything like some of this. Certainly, I think bits and pieces of this are going to sound familiar, which is, I think, a good thing. All right. So July 23rd, 2023, just a few days ago, finally was able to sit down. It had taken me a couple of days because I really wanted to focus and have a good amount of time with Melchizedek to talk about this topic. All right, and they said, I'm feeling so familiar with these teams, the Halls of Amenti guides with Melchizedek. It's just become such a they just really feel like family, just really familiar and comfortable. I was just telling them how much I love them and how much I appreciate them and all they're doing for us, for me, and how excited I was about hearing about how the pyramids were built. And they said that they too were also excited for the conversation. They said, you have been asking for a while, and we feel this is a good time, and we're happy that you're feeling ready. And we're honored to bring this information forward through you. I said, wonderful team, take it away whenever you're ready. Thank you, Shauna, Melchizedek said. We are obviously going to begin way back. We're going back in Earth's history 34,000 years ago when it all began. And I'm just going to stop right there. I've done just a tiny bit of research because I thought 34,000 years ago, National Geographic and some of these bigger news agencies here are talking about the pyramids maybe being, 2,000 to 6,000 years old is all, or 2,000 BC to 6,000 BC. So a little bit older, but nothing near 34,000 years. So I have a feeling that's already going to have people going, how is this even possible? Well, when you kind of hear the rest of the story, it all kind of starts to make sense. So I don't even know. Okay. Okay, again, these are the 3 Great Pyramids of Giza. We have the Great Pyramid, and I'm going to botch these names, the Pyramid of Khafre and the Pyramid of Menkaure. Sorry, I know I've probably mispronounced those. All right. Shauna, they said, the building of the pyramids in Egypt was no small task. It was monumental, and it was not easy. Please know that it did take a lot of planning and engineering, forethought and foresight, and many rounds of revisions to the plans. The architects knew they had one shot at this, so great pains were made to ensure that every last stone, every seam, and every angle was perfect. Shauna, for the three major pyramids, the pyramids of Giza, including the Great Pyramid, painstakingly accurate, small-scale depictions and designs of these pyramids were created first. All three of these pyramids, including their placement on the earth, were pre-constructed on a much smaller scale before major construction began. Here the architects were able to perfect the designs and orientation of these pyramids. The small-scale version of the Great Pyramid stood roughly 8 feet tall. In this way, the architects were able to pre-plan the various hallways and rooms and caverns within the pyramid's walls to great detail and to understand exactly what would be required to construct such a place. And they said here that the pre-construction phase of the three great pyramids of Giza spanned approximately 200 years, with approximately 27 architects and engineers working on the project over those 200 years. All right. I think some estimations have those three pyramids being built within a span of, say, 40 to 50 years or something. You know, there's all kinds of theories out there nobody really knows. And all of this, too, if it's not resonating, you just can put it on a shelf till we get more information. But 200 years just in the planning and the creating of these small scale, basically replicas of what the larger ones were going to be, with only 27 architects and engineers. Again, I'll explain this more, but it was just like, I was just really scratching my head. 34,000 years ago, 200 years just to plan and design these before construction even began, with only a small handful of people. And they continued here. To ensure that there was continuity along those 200 years with the many different people who worked on the plan, the oversight was provided by a family of rulers of the time who were human. However, they said, this project was envisioned and set in motion by a hybrid race that originated in Atlantis. These Atlantean adventurers set out to replicate some of Atlantis' most powerful navigational tools, but on a larger scale. So this part I had seen somewhere, that somebody figured this has to have been technology from Atlantis. You know, and even the idea of Atlantis being real, we're not sure about that even, right? But, you know, I've spent time there in the halls of Amenti. I've had a lifetime there, a significant lifetime there. And, you know, it's certainly something that I believe was real. And Melchizedek talks about this a lot today. All right. They continue here. In terms of navigation, the three pyramids were meant to emit a high vibrational frequency that could be detected by flying craft, which had the instrumentation to detect such frequencies. A high vibrational frequency to be detected by flying craft. That was the whole point of why those three pyramids were built. They said here, this was a homing beacon for advanced aerial craft coming and going from Earth. The internal power source that would fuel that vibrational beam emitted from these pyramids is no longer functioning. These three pyramids, in essence, acted as a welcoming port to outside visitors. Unfortunately, the Giza pyramids were used for the purpose of a homing beacon for the planet for only a relatively short amount of time compared to how long it took to construct the structures. The pyramids of Giza were a huge experiment, a grand experiment to try to replace and improve upon some of the greatest technology in Atlantis. All right, so that, oh my gosh, you guys, I talked for like, I channeled for like another 10 minutes and I realized that my microphone had gone dead. So I'm talking away for 10 minutes and I realized that none of that's getting recorded. So I stopped and I restarted here after that was charged. All right. And I'm going to summarize what was said in those 10 minutes and then Melchizedek picks it up. So basically, they said this was a grand experiment, these three pyramids. And I'm not talking about any of the other pyramids in that Nile Valley or Egypt or that whole region or anywhere else in the world for that matter. I have no clue. We're talking about the three major pyramids that get all the attention in Egypt. Excuse me. Okay, so that they really, this is a failed experiment. They had the vision of creating a major intergalactic spaceport here on Earth, and it just didn't happen in the way that they had envisioned it. It did not come to fruition in that way, at least not for the long term. And they said they had gone into some detail about how the stones were cut, most of it being limestone. They said that these stone slabs were cut with Atlantean technology again. And they said that the way that they were cut, these blocks were cut, was using super concentrated high vibrational frequencies that are basically sound vibration frequencies. And there was literally a tool that would emit this that was specifically meant for cutting rock here on Earth, meant for cutting our densest materials, even something like crystal, for example. So they had machines, technology that did this work and cut it to perfection. All right, so we're gonna get into this here. Okay, so Melchizedek picked this up. They said, yes, Shauna, as we were saying, this particular technology could really easily and quickly cut through the limestone and the other materials, such as granite, used to create these pyramids, and with great precision, we would add. What this reminds me of is when Racer talked about how the directed energy weapons work and how, basically high vibrational frequencies, imagine sound, basically reorganizing the atoms, the molecules, and whatever it's hitting. Similar idea, I think, with this. So this is not technology that at least we're not using. I mean, we have energy weapons that are in use, and our military has been developing these things, and probably in secret space programs and all of that. But yeah, this technology seems to be pretty common actually, outside of what we normally are able to make use of here on the planet. Melchizedek continued here. Once the small-scale versions of these pyramids were created, these Atlantean hybrids had the ability to upscale these designs with great accuracy. And they were quite adept at building pyramid structures. However, these pyramids were going to be much larger than what had been constructed previously by this particular race. So from my understanding, whatever pyramid structures with this type of homing beacon technology, was happening in Atlantis was this much smaller scale. Like they decided to go for it and tried to do something much larger. They said once the blueprint was basically generated from what they considered to be the perfect small-scale versions, creating all the pieces to build the pyramid was not that difficult, though it was tedious and time-consuming. Excuse me, they said, let's talk about the transport of these materials. I said, exciting, yes, please. The big stone slabs were cut on site at the source, at the quarry, if you will. And these magnificent stone blocks were airlifted into place, Shauna, and meticulously maneuvered into their exact spots by humans. Airlifted, team. Cut by machines using technology from Atlantis, perfectly rendered, perfectly sized, each and every individual stone based on small-scale replicas of these giant pyramids. And these slabs, these stones, the pieces were airlifted into place. Okay. Did I add they were meticulously maneuvered into their exact spots by humans? I don't know if I said that. This was repeated one block at a time, all stone being produced and placed according to a very detailed blueprint created from the small-scale replica of the large. Some adjustments and assessments were made on site during the construction, but mostly the structures came together fairly easily based on pre-construction planning that they were able to achieve. And they took a break. And actually, this channeling took forever. It reminded me a lot of Queen Elizabeth, where one or two sentences would come and then there'd be a big pause and I'd be kind of waiting and I'd be like, please continue when you're ready. So a lot of that. So it's, 2 or 3 hours probably worth of channeling. And I would say probably 3,000 or 4,000 words. I said, thanks, Melchizedek. I'd say, I'd love to know more about how this was actually airlifted. I said, what kind of craft was it? Who owns the craft? What was the means of propulsion? Do we have any record of these craft? And they said here, the aircraft of which we speak was Atlantean by design and included thrusters and propulsion that were optimized to counterbalance gravity. These craft actually worked with the force of gravity in their favor to transport such heavy material. Anti-gravity stuff, this is a thing. We've got this. We've learned, I think, we've got this in Antarctica, if you believe what's out there. So this is a thing. I said, thank you, team. Can you tell me anything else? Are they using plasma? Are they using vibration? Are they using sound? How big are they? How many of them were there? Who's flying them? Thank you, team. They said, Shauna, there was a fleet of approximately 20 to 24 of these flying craft. They were the workhorses of this construction. Consider these anti-gravity flying machines that were remote controlled, relatively small, and also relatively simple. In terms of their capabilities, they had the means by which to pick up a large slab of stone and lift it into the air and bring it to the construction site, flying at low altitude. The craft were controlled by a central command post located near the construction site. Yeah. Certainly lifting of these slabs has been out there as a theory. I don't know if anybody's thought of the actual craft had lifted these blocks and placed them. I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys know and what you've heard, or what's been channeled. I said, thank you, Melchizedek. I said, were these craft constructed in Atlantis and then flown over to Egypt to create these pyramids? And they said, Shauna, these crafts were not constructed on Earth, but were made for such a job by extraterrestrials. Okay. I said, well, can you tell me which extraterrestrials? Which race created them? And they said, dear one, let's save that conversation for another time. So they didn't want to answer which extraterrestrials created that. And some of it too is just my lack of knowledge. It's kind of hard to start from zero when you're talking about different species, different planets, different star systems. It's kind of, if it's not in my vernacular, or if I don't have some kind of conscious awareness of some of this, it's really hard to channel it. So they kind of work with what I know and the words that I know, the faculties that I have around all this. I said, okay, that sounds good. I said, Can you tell me more about the machines that cut the big slabs of stone? Is that something that would have been hand carried by the humans and put in place? Is it a fairly large machine? I'm trying to imagine what this looks like. Obviously they were able to input exact dimensions, into this machine or something to be able to cut them to such precise dimensions, right? They said here, the machine was placed directly near the stone being used for the slabs, each piece being cut specifically based on the blueprint and placed exactly where it needed to be placed on the construction zone. After it was airlifted over to the construction zone, it would be gently laid into place, and then any final maneuverings were done by humans. Any final cuts or fixing any issues were human assisted. Okay. I said, thanks so much, Melchizedek, for answering my questions. I said, I have a ton more questions, but I'll let you continue. And they said, thank you, Shauna. The power source that emitted this high vibrational frequency straight out of the top of these 3 pyramids was generated through lost Atlantean technology using consciousness, crystals, plasma, and other technology. Other technology, Shauna, that we won't be able to describe to you in detail today. And I said, well, was the power source for that located within the pyramids, or was it sitting outside of the pyramids? And they said, Shauna, this was placed within the pyramids themselves. Okay, I said, I asked a few more questions here. I said, how long did it take to construct, say, the largest pyramid, the Great Pyramid? How long did it take? I said, unless they were all constructed at the same time. And I said, how many people were involved with the construction? And they said, thank you, Shauna. These 3 pyramids were constructed one at a time in succession. They started with the smallest one first because, remember, it was a grand experiment to see if they could replicate the most powerful technologies from Atlantis here in Egypt, but on a much larger scale. And overall, they said the construction of the 3 pyramids took what was approximately 700 years. And for context, these 3 pyramids served their intended purpose for only about 5,000 years before the homing beacon technology was removed and they stopped being used for galactic multiplanetary navigation. 700 years it took to construct the 3 pyramids, even with all the technology that they were using. So they really took their time with this, it seems. 700 years, and over this last week, I tried really confirming these time frames with Melchizedek. The 34,000 years, I asked about that a couple of times, asked about the 200 and the 700 and the number of people and all that. Just really wanted to make sure that I was getting these numbers correct. So they said, in terms of the number of humans who helped with the design and construction, over the 900 or so years between design and construction totals approximately 20,000. And I'm like, did I get that right? 20,000 people over basically 700 years. We had 27 people who basically were in charge of all the designing of it for those 200 years. And then basically they're saying around 20,000 people, only 20,000 people were helping over the 700 years. I said, that just doesn't seem like very many people. And like I'm doing the math, like how many people is that per year? And it just seems really outrageous. It just didn't seem like very many people for that long of a time frame. But they talk about this a little bit more. They said here, with the technology that they were able to employ at the time, it was not as labor as intensive as you would have expected. These pyramid builders were treated well, Shauna, and it was seen as an honor and a privilege to be involved with such a project. There was a lot of energy and excitement around the project, even over the course of several hundred years. The people who were able to be involved were highly skilled, highly trained, and you could consider them to be long-term employees. They were highly productive and worked well as a cohesive unit throughout the centuries. Yeah, think of the continuity. At least how we think of our time, our life expectancy and the people coming and going. And I mean, that's a huge undertaking. That was a huge undertaking. I said, okay, 34,000 years ago. I said, I'd love to know, how many ships came and went over those 5,000 years. Who was coming and going, and for what reasons? What were they doing? So, but we called it good for then, and I picked this up with them the next day. Let me switch to my next transcription for this. Okay. More about the pyramids. And this is when I really just wanted to confirm this 34,000 years ago, because I had done a tiny bit of research on, what are we saying on the internet? What are we aging these things at? And like I said, 2,500 to 6,000 BC. So this is a much different time frame, an entirely different era. We never talked about the Sphinx or anything like that, or the other structures that were there. So I can't speak to that stuff. So I just wanted to just get a better timeline, like just confirm that timeline. And, it's like, and I also asked, what was going on in Atlantis at 34,000 years? Had it already imploded, or was it still active? And I said, where was Atlantis? Thank you, team. And Melchizedek answered like this. Shauna, the timeline of which we speak is accurate, 34,000 years ago. Imagine lush and tropical, dear one, a very different environment from what you see today. Abundant, fertile, it was a time of expansion and growth in that particular area on the planet. And I know that the Nile Valley today is still very fertile. There's a lot going on there. They said, in terms of Atlantis was still an active community when the pyramids were constructed. A relatively small group of beings from Atlantis left Atlantis for the Nile Valley. As mentioned, they wanted to do what they could to recreate, but on a much grander scale, the technology that was in use in Atlantis. And why did they want to do that? Melchizedek said. At the end of the day, Shauna, it was about power. Who controlled the major interplanetary navigational systems? Where was this hub to be built on planet Earth, and who would control it? As explained previously, the three pyramids were a grand experiment, and generally speaking, this experiment was considered a failure in the eyes of all who were involved. Yeah. I said, Melchizedek, can you tell me why did it fail? And they said, Shauna, by today's standards, if you are to look at that from your point of view and what you know of the scale of time and accomplishments that may be made within that certain time frame, if you are applying a historical context to such an event, you might consider it to be a roaring success. Yeah, because I was really questioning this. Like, gosh, it ran for 5,000 years. That seems like super impressive when you think about our timeline here. And they said, therefore, it's a bit challenging to describe why this was a failure in ways that you can understand deeply. And they continued here. The building of the Great Pyramids was meant to usher in an era for Earth unlike any other planet of this type and size. It was to place planet Earth among the most sought after, visited, and patronized planet in this quadrant of the universe. So these folks had a vision. The pyramids were simply the homing device to help interstellar travelers arrive here easily, and also would direct them to a specific place on the planet, this valley. The founders in this area wanted this to be a new Atlantis. They were thinking on a much grander scale than those they had left behind in Atlantis. Imagine this being a port, and they having full control over the port, and eventually being the only port of its kind in this entire part of the universe. And they continued here. Earth would have been converted into an interstellar tourist destination. Also, trade and commerce among different races would be at the forefront of this plan. And Shauna, they said, some of the goods that were being produced that were meant to be sold and traded in this type of market environment included genetically modified species and beings having been created as slave labor and for other skills and services to be owned and to be kept. Okay, so we know this about Atlantis. We've channeled this directly. And, Dolores Cannon, while she had, I think, several people to come forward with how and why the pyramids were built that were all different, she did talk about Atlantis being this hub of genetic mastery where, yeah, they created these incredible beings that, but it was really sad, really as slaves. And it was part of the major reason why Atlantis, failed and was ended basically. So yeah, this I have channeled before. They said many universal laws were being broken at the time. Their ability to modify and generate DNA outpaced their ability to handle these skills responsibly and with integrity. I said, thank you, team. I said, did the negative reptilian influence here have anything to do with anything going on between Atlantis and this new outpost in Egypt? And they said, Shauna, this is a much larger question and we prefer to answer it at a different time. So I've got to make sure to follow up with that. I said, okay, thank you. I said, this was operating for 5,000 years. I mean, it sounds like, at least for a certain time, many species did come and go, and there was an active trade going on. Is that correct? They said, yes, Shauna, that's correct. I said, well, what ultimately brought down the pyramids being used as a homing device? What happened when this was all shut down after 5,000 years? And Melchizedek said here, there wasn't one specific thing that happened, and its demise came over a relatively long period. Where there was a peak in activity and then a decline and then eventually abandonment. One thing I didn't ask them is more about, we kind of know that there's obviously burial chambers and, tombs and mummified pharaohs and all this good stuff and all these, all the Egyptian writing and all this good stuff that's going on inside these pyramids. I imagine that there's a possibility that that all came later with the rise of Egypt, say like 4,000, BC. So fairly recent compared to what we're talking about with this. So I didn't get a chance to ask that, but hopefully they would answer something like that for us. Let me know if you have other questions I can throw their way. And then they continued here. The port itself was a bit before its time. While Atlantis was a robust and thriving center of activity on the planet, much of the rest of the planet was undeveloped and not much of interest to the majority of travelers it was trying to attract. And it became known that there was darkness here, and not all species were in alignment with that. Oh yeah, we had darkness. I said, well, Melchizedek, did the port just die? Or did the destruction of Atlantis have something to do with this? Or negative reptilians, or just a loss of vision and momentum for it over the years? And they said, first of all, Shauna, this port in Egypt was not supported by the leadership in Atlantis. This was seen as direct competition to what they had established and what they were working toward. This was a breakaway faction who wanted to create a new center, a new hub of intergalactic commerce control. Second, they said, the lack of interest in Earth and resources and products available here did not appeal to a wide audience. Traffic was not what it was hoped to be. The Atlantean faction in Egypt, over time, felt that this was a losing prospect, and eventually the port was abandoned. I said, thank you so much, team. I said, I have a lot more questions about Atlantis, especially because I've had a past life there with the plasma tubs. You guys remember the tubs that I talked about last summer? I seem to have been there when the whole thing imploded. Remember that, saw that very, very clearly in the halls of Amenti. I said, I'm really curious about the rise and fall of Atlantis, the timing, and again, where was it? Please let me know if you're willing to answer any of that. They said, yes, you're correct in that you had a lifetime there as a high priestess, and you met a tragic end along with nearly everybody else who lived in Atlantis at the time. Shauna, Atlantis existed on planet Earth approximately, drumroll please, 200,000 BC to 20,000 BC. And yes, this was contained in the present-day Atlantic Ocean. All right, so that's from Melchizedek, team, 200,000 BC to 20,000 BC. I know that this is not in alignment with a lot of the literature out there, but really nobody knows. Nobody knows. So this is another option here. They said parts of that civilization had spread out to other continents over time. Africa, Egypt being one of them. I said, it seems like they were around for a long time, 180,000 years. I'm surprised that the entire planet wasn't taken over by them. I said, how was it that they kept themselves so concentrated? And they said, in the grand scheme of things, Shauna, this was a relatively short timeline for this species. They also had a very, very long lifespans, and the population was kept relatively small throughout that time frame. Yeah, so I didn't even ask about, how many, what's the population over that 180,000 years? So who knows? The longer lifespans, relatively small population, and a relatively short timeline. Yeah, I mean, the people, like the folks on the Galactic Federation of Lightships who we talked to earlier this year, they, talk about their species being kind of millions of years old. So 180,000 years really isn't much. And this batch of humanity, not very long at all. I said, the humans that you talked about to help build the pyramids, those 20,000 or so, can you talk more about them? I said, so these were humans on the planet, but they were not Atlantean. Were they seeded by creator gods? Thank you. And Melchizedek said, Shauna, humans on the planet, as you would think of them, were a bit more evolved than the humans of today. And that's correct, Shauna. Many of them did not originate in Atlantis, but came from other places like Lemuria and other continents, and there was an active seeding program happening at the time. The Atlanteans who defected to create the Great Pyramids worked with the other humans in the region at the time, and also drew in peoples from all around the world in that time frame to help with the construction of the pyramids. They were physically and mentally highly capable, and they also had expanded life expectancies from what it is today. It's a lot. We're going to keep going here. I said, okay, team, I said, what else might the constituents want to know about this time, about the pyramids, anything else you want to add about rounding out our understanding of this, of what's going on here? And I said, would you be willing to answer any follow-up questions in more detail? And they said, certainly, Shauna, we'd be happy to answer more questions. They said here, in our own way, we tell you these things with the hope that it helps round out an understanding of planet Earth and some of its history in the larger galactic space. There's also much to be learned about managing, implementing, producing, and using technology, with high degrees of integrity, something even this round of humanity grapples with. It's a process. Yes, it is. And that's basically where this ended. Let me just see if there was anything else. Okay, so I thought that was totally interesting. Really, really cool stuff. Hopefully, we'll learn more. Lemuria, we talked about Lemuria quite a bit with Melchizedek. It seems to me Lemuria overlapped with Atlantis, but predates Atlantis. I think Lemuria came before Atlantis, and then there was some overlap. And I know from the Ark of the Covenant, the Halls of Amenti, what I've learned about my past lives. I was a negative reptilian on Lemuria sometime around 200,000 years ago, and this is when I changed sides from the dark to the light and began my, you know, experience as a seraphim. And then I'm still doing that today, 200,000 years later. So, okay, so a lot to take in there. And I asked Melchizedek just this afternoon, or I guess yesterday afternoon at this point, is there anything else that they wanted to communicate with you? And here's what they had to say. Well, with all of us. Yes, Shauna, thank you for asking. Where we intend to take you next, very few have ventured so deep. These coming weeks and months will really stretch and challenge how you regard this experience and what you consider to be reality. You are the keepers of this information, dear ones. Your knowing, your conscious awareness of certain things will be a major catalyst in the coming phases of this awakening process for humanity. Please remain vigilant about your light and steadfast in love. We are honored and privileged to be able to commune with you at this level. Thank you for your focus and your dedication to the light. And I'm like, you guys are just the best. You're just too awesome. I just love you. I'm talking to them like this now. I'm like, this is just so amazing. So I'm so excited to talk about the pyramids today. All right, team. I'm going to call this good for the night. There were other things that kind of happened in the halls of Amenti, but I think I'm going to save that stuff. We'll let you take in all of this. All right. I hope everybody's doing amazing. We are just really in the thick of it, aren't we? What you're doing is important. I love and appreciate all of you so much. You're not here by mistake. You're in the right place at the right time. And I'm so appreciative for all of you. Okay, team, I will talk with you soon. I love you. Mwah.